British Airways Flight 762 is currently positioned on the runway at Heathrow Airport, ready for its first departure of the day. The weather is favorable, and with experienced pilots in command, everything seems set for a routine flight. The aircraft has received clearance for takeoff from runway 27 left. However, an unnoticed complication is about to emerge. What appears to be a minor error will soon develop into a critical emergency. As the plane accelerates down the runway, several passengers seated near the wings notice something unusual outside their windows, an anomaly that raises concern. What have they observed, and how will the crew react upon discovering the situation? Join us as we explore the unfolding events of British Airways Flight 762. On May 24, 2013, British Airways Flight 762 was being prepared for its initial journey of the day, bound for Oslo, Norway. The aircraft assigned to this flight was an Airbus A319, built in 2001. This reliable jet is frequently employed for short to medium-haul flights and is well regarded for its strong safety record, earning the confidence of airlines worldwide. The previous evening, during a routine weekly inspection, technicians opened the fan cowl doors on both engines to check the oil levels of the integrated drive generator, IDG. Lacking the necessary tools, they deferred the task, leaving the fan cowl doors unlatched, which violated standard operating procedures. To make matters worse, no warning notice was placed in the cockpit, allowing the oversight to remain undetected. Later that night, the technicians returned but mistakenly serviced an Airbus A321 parked nearby, believing they had completed the required work on Flight 762 and subsequently signed off on the task. The documentation for Flight 762 indicated that the fan cowl doors were not secured, and the oil levels of the integrated drive generator, IDG, were below the required operational standards. The following morning, at 5:45 a.m., 2 pilots and 3 cabin crew members reported for duty at the operator's crew report center located at Heathrow Airport. The pilots and cabin crew conducted their briefings separately before heading to the aircraft, which was stationed at stand 513 in Terminal 5. They convened on the aircraft approximately 45 minutes prior to departure. The pilots collaboratively reviewed the aircraft's technical log, after which the captain began preparing the flight deck while the co-pilot performed an external walk-around inspection. During this inspection, the co-pilot meticulously assessed the aircraft's exterior, methodically checking various components. He examined the landing gear for tire condition and hydraulic leaks, inspected the wings for any visible damage, and ensured that the control surfaces, including the flaps, were free from obstructions. The engines were also scrutinized for any signs of leaks or irregularities. Everything appeared to be in order, and with no visible issues identified, the co-pilot returned to the cockpit, having completed the pre-flight checks. When asked if he noticed anything unusual during the walk-around, he reported that everything looked satisfactory. However, a significant oversight had occurred. The unsecured fan cowl door had been overlooked during the inspection, a mistake that would have serious implications later in the flight. Meanwhile, as 75 passengers boarded the aircraft, it was refueled with 7,600 kg of fuel, which was more than sufficient for the relatively short journey to Oslo. During these routine ground operations, a critical error was about to unfold. A member of the ground handling team captured images for a training video, completely oblivious to the fact that the fan cowl doors had been left unsecured. Following the completion of routine ground operations, the pushback tug arrived 15 minutes prior to the scheduled departure. The driver conducted his standard pre-departure inspection, walking around the aircraft in an anti-clockwise manner, and found nothing unusual. It is important to note that ground personnel are not trained to identify unlatched fan cowl doors. Consequently, this critical issue went unnoticed, and at 6:57, Flight 762 was pushed back from the gate, unaware of the hidden risk. The pilots proceeded to taxi the aircraft toward runway 27 left. In the cockpit, the 50-year-old captain, who had accumulated over 12,500 flight hours, including 6,600 on the A320 series, had served as captain for 11 years after beginning his career as an engineering apprentice. The 33-year-old co-pilot had 5,400 flight hours, with 4,100 on the A320, having joined the airline in 2006 after previously flying the Boeing 737. On this occasion, The first officer was in command of the flight, while the captain served as the monitoring pilot. The weather conditions were ideal for flying, with light winds at 12 knots, visibility exceeding 10 kilometers, and mild scattered cloud. The temperature was a cool 7°C, creating perfect conditions for a routine flight. British Airways Flight 762 was cleared for takeoff from runway 27 left at 7:16, with the first officer at the controls, and everything appeared normal. However, as the aircraft accelerated, several passengers seated near the wings began to notice something amiss. The fan cowl doors on both engines exhibited unusual movement, flapping in the airflow moments after the aircraft took off and began its ascent. The unsecured doors were subsequently torn away by the wind's force, resulting in debris being propelled into the air. Pilots of another aircraft, preparing for takeoff on runway 27, shortly after the departure of Flight 762, observed the debris scattered across the runway. Concerned for safety, they promptly communicated a pan to air traffic control, notifying them of the potential hazard. British Airways 762, another aircraft, has reported debris on the runway. Can you confirm that everything is normal? The response indicated uncertainty regarding the nature of the debris. Despite all instruments in the cockpit displaying normal readings, the aircraft was far from being in a stable condition. The abrupt loss of the fan cowl doors had immediate repercussions. Debris from the doors impacted the fuselage and wings, notably puncturing the fuel metering unit's spill return pipe. This damage resulted in a significant fuel leak from the right engine, creating a risk of an engine fire, yet the pilots remained oblivious to the developing situation. In the cabin, several passengers on both sides pressed their call buttons and shouted to gain the attention of the flight attendants. The senior cabin crew member found this behavior peculiar and attempted to contact the pilots via the interphone. The captain noticed the call just as the landing gear was being retracted, but, preoccupied with managing the aircraft's ascent, chose to disregard it, interpreting the lack of response as a non-issue. The pilots were occupied and fully aware of the circumstances, so she refrained from attempting to make another call. Meanwhile, the aircraft ascended past the acceleration altitude of 1,100 feet, with autopilot 2 engaged. The first officer adjusted the thrust levers to the climb detent. However, just 1 second later, the auto thrust disengaged and the master caution alarm activated, signaling to the pilots that an issue had arisen. The crew promptly retracted the flaps as the aircraft accelerated to the target speed of 250 knots and continued its ascent to 6,000 feet with the flaps retracted. At this point, the crew was finally able to concentrate on the fault messages that had previously appeared on the ECAM. The captain observed that the pressure ratio gauge for the right engine was blank. Following the ECAM's directives, he selected N1 mode for both engines, but 4 seconds later, the master caution alarm sounded once more, indicating a failure in the yellow hydraulic system. The situation quickly intensified, and the crew recognized that they were facing a significant emergency. The yellow hydraulic system is one of the 3 primary hydraulic systems on the Airbus A319, responsible for powering specific aircraft components, including nose-wheel steering, right side brakes, reverse thrust for the right engine, flaps, slats, and cargo door operations. In the event of a primary system failure, it also acts as a backup for the landing gear. When pressure is lost in the yellow system, the power transfer unit, PTU, can transfer hydraulic pressure from another system to sustain essential functions. However, if there is an issue within the yellow system, such as a fluid leak, maintaining the PTU's operation could be problematic. The captain took standard precautions to prevent pressure loss in the unaffected hydraulic system by shutting down the power transfer unit, PTU. This action ensured that the yellow hydraulic system remained isolated, allowing the crew to address the issue without further endangering the aircraft's hydraulic systems. As the aircraft stabilized at an altitude of 6,000 feet, the co-pilot conducted a visual inspection of the right wing and observed damage to its leading edge. "Captain, I see some damage on the right wing. It appears that something may have struck it, possibly debris." The captain responded, "We need to return to Heathrow." Pan. This is British Airways Flight 762. We are experiencing an engine issue, along with a hydraulic system failure, and request radar vectors for a return to Heathrow Airport. British Airways Flight 762 received confirmation that radar vectors would be provided to maintain proximity to Heathrow and was advised to request additional assistance if needed. Meanwhile, the senior cabin crew member noticed several passengers near the right wing attempting to get her attention. Upon approaching them, they indicated visible damage to the right engine. However, her limited view from the aisle prevented her from noticing a critical detail: fuel leaking from the engine. After assessing the damage, the senior cabin crew member contacted the cockpit 6 minutes after her initial attempt, stating, "Captain, I have checked the right engine, and the top appears to be blown open with visible damage." The captain acknowledged, "Understood. We are already en route back to Heathrow and will continue to monitor the situation." Should I inform the passengers? Yes, please make an initial public address announcement. An additional update will be provided once our inspections are complete. Although she reported damage to the engine cowl, she did not mention the fuel leak as it was not visible from her vantage point. Consequently, the flight crew remained unaware of the fuel leaking from the right engine, a critical situation that would soon escalate and endanger everyone on board. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your senior cabin crew member speaking. We are currently facing a technical issue and will be returning to Heathrow. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. The captain will provide further information shortly. In the meantime, air traffic control has directed the aircraft towards the Lambourne holding area. The senior cabin crew member conducted another inspection of the engines and discovered that the left engine was also damaged. She promptly contacted the cockpit again. "Captain, I have just checked again. The left engine cowling is also missing. When the cowling from the right engine detached, it struck the right overwing emergency exit." "Both engines?" the captain inquired. "Yes, both engines have cowling damage," she confirmed. "Understood. We will proceed. Stay alert. I will update you shortly." After assessing the situation, the pilots were briefed to prepare for a landing on runway 27 right, as runway 27 left had been closed due to debris on the surface. Large pieces of the fan cowl doors scattered in the area rendered it unusable for landing. At this point, Flight 762 was still 27 nautical miles east of the airport, and the situation in the cockpit was deteriorating as the fuel imbalance alert was activated. The co-pilot quickly identified it as a fuel leak, which was indeed correct, but the leak had been ongoing. For a brief period, the pilots remained unaware of the situation while the co-pilot addressed the issue. The captain requested vectors to the Instrument Landing System, ILS for runway 27 right, and air traffic control. A TC granted clearance for the aircraft to turn left to intercept the localizer. As the aircraft initiated its turn, the captain informed a TC of a suspected fuel leak and indicated that there were still 5 tons of fuel on board. Subsequently, he addressed the passengers, stating, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I would like to inform you that one of the engine covers has detached and made contact with a door on the aircraft. However, I want to reassure you that both engines are functioning normally. As a precaution, we will be returning to London Heathrow. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened, and the cabin crew will provide further instructions shortly. Thank you for your cooperation." Following this announcement, he issued an alert call, requesting the senior cabin crew member to come to the flight deck for an emergency briefing. The senior cabin crew member, accompanied by a colleague, promptly proceeded to the cockpit. The captain informed her that they would be landing in approximately 6 minutes, and that the cabin should be prepared for a normal landing. He explained that the aircraft would halt on the runway for inspection. After receiving the briefing and clear instructions, the cabin crew returned to the cabin to finalize their preparations. Shortly after their departure, the co-pilot calculated that fuel was leaking at a rate of 100 kg every 2 minutes and expressed his concern to the captain that the right engine might shut down due to fuel exhaustion. A little over 4,000 kg of fuel remained, with approximately 1,000 kg in the right tank. With this information, the crew prepared for a Configuration 3 landing and notified air traffic control of a potential engine shutdown. Upon further examination, the co-pilot recalculated the fuel leak rate, discovering it was not 100 kg every 2 minutes, but rather 100 kg every minute. This critical realization escalated the urgency of the situation, prompting him to strongly recommend shutting down the right engine to mitigate the rapid fuel loss. However, the captain, weighing all available options, opted against this course of action. Minutes later, the aircraft was aligned with the Instrument Landing System, ILS localizer, 14.7 nautical miles from touchdown at an altitude of 4,000 feet, with flaps set to selected. Despite the various challenges the aircraft was encountering, it appeared they were on a path toward a safe landing until an unexpected loud bang emanated from the right engine, accompanied by a sudden drop in its performance parameters. Recognizing the seriousness of the situation, the captain promptly shut down the engine. However, as he did so, the fire alarm activated in the cockpit, indicating a new danger. Fuel from the damaged spill return pipe had ignited, resulting in an external fire near the cabin. Passengers were taken aback by the sudden noise and the sight of flames erupting from the right engine. Panic ensued, with some passengers screaming while others peered out of the windows to grasp the unfolding crisis. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, the crew responded swiftly, discharging the first fire extinguisher. With the engine no longer operational and a fire still smoldering, the aircraft found itself in a precarious situation. The left engine, which had remained operational throughout the flight, was now the sole source of power sustaining the aircraft in the air. The survival of all individuals on board depended entirely on this single engine as they hurried toward Heathrow Airport. Moments after discharging the fire extinguisher, the autopilot disengaged, compelling the co-pilot to assume manual control of the plane. Acknowledging the gravity of their predicament, the captain promptly issued a mayday call to air traffic control, indicating the emergency situation on board. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is British Airways Flight 762. We are experiencing a fuel leak and engine difficulties. We intend to land at Heathrow, but may require a go-around. He then lowered the landing gear and activated the second fire extinguisher in an attempt to suppress the flames, yet the fire warning persisted. Turning to the co-pilot, the captain emphasized the necessity of a successful landing, as there would be no opportunity for a second attempt. With the flaps set to 3, he took command of the aircraft at an altitude of 500 feet, approximately 1.4 nautical miles from the runway. He directed the co-pilot to adjust the thrust levers to regulate their speed while he concentrated on the landing. In the cabin, fear gripped the passengers. The intense vibrations of the aircraft and the faint scent of smoke heightened the anxiety. Some passengers remained frozen in their seats, while others murmured prayers, clutching the armrests and seatbelts tightly. The tension was palpable as the plane approached the runway. At 7:44, British Airways Flight 762 made contact with the runway, the wheels striking the tarmac as the co-pilot. The left engine was immediately subjected to reverse thrust due to a prior hydraulic failure, necessitating the captain's reliance on manual braking for the aircraft's braking system. This action ultimately resulted in the bursting of the right main gear tire. British Airways Flight 762 had flames visible emanating from the right engine, with wind conditions recorded at 29 degrees at 13 knots. Despite these adverse conditions, the aircraft was brought to a safe stop. The captain strategically oriented the aircraft to allow the wind to direct the flames away from the fuselage, thereby reducing the risk to passengers. Emergency services, already on standby, promptly arrived to extinguish the fire and facilitate the evacuation. The airport fire and rescue service successfully quelled the flames in the right engine, while the crew initiated an evacuation from the left side of the aircraft. All passengers were evacuated safely, with no serious injuries reported. The Air Accidents Investigation Branch determined that the incident's primary cause was the failure of maintenance technicians to properly secure the fan cowl doors following overnight checks, as they did not adhere to the correct latching procedures. Additionally, inspections conducted by the pushback tug driver and co-pilot failed to identify the unsecured doors. The design of the fan cowl door latches, located at the bottom of the engine nacelle, further complicated visibility during standard walk-around inspections, and the lack of high-visibility paint on the latches diminished their detectability. In response to this incident, British Airways and Airbus instituted safety measures, revising maintenance protocols to ensure the proper securing of fan cowl doors, and modifying latch designs for improved visibility. New training programs for ground handling personnel and flight crews were also established to enhance hazard detection prior to departure. Despite the significant damage sustained by the aircraft, The prompt actions of the flight crew and emergency services ensured that there were no fatalities or serious injuries.